Well, nobody expected this on a Sunday in the offseason, but Myles Garrett is sticking around, it sounds like. Gets a new 4-year extension tacked onto the 2 years left on his deal. We'll give you the details here real quick, and then I think there's a bunch of different angles to sort of dissect here when it comes to this. But 4 years, $40 million per year on average, $123.5 million guaranteed, $204.8 million in total. Keeps him in Cleveland through 2030. He has a no trade clause added to the deal as well, which I think is an important note that we'll talk about. But certainly, Anthony, a couple things. Didn't expect this, but also proof that I guess everybody really does have a price.
Yeah, right. There's a price tag for anything, and yeah, definitely didn't expect this. When you woke up this morning, then not expecting to see that this is this great news. I think for Cleveland, I think that this offseason has been off to like such a rocky start that they needed a little positive momentum. Like you needed something to latch onto, right? It's been up until this point everything negative, everything landing the wrong way for the Browns and for Browns fans. That I think that at the very least, and we'll dive into all the different storylines and all the different ways that this is going to ripple. But I think at face value, this is something that can be positive for Browns fans as we get into free agency next week and then turn our eyes right to the draft, because I think this influences a lot of stuff.
Yeah, and the timing I think is important given that free agency does start in, tomorrow legal tampering, they call it, obviously begins, but then after that, you get the actual free agency starting on Wednesday at 4 o'clock. So, it sounds like, and here's where I think this conversation should start, Anthony, because we joke about everybody has a price. I still don't think this was ultimately about the money for Myles. It's easy to say that now. It's easy to sit there and be like, oh, well, he became the highest paid non-quarterback, so of course this was about the money. But guys, I don't think Myles could have accomplished that without doing what he did. He could he made his point made at the end of the season when he left the door open up potentially playing somewhere else. He could have done all this and gotten the deal. And here's the thing. He did all this and the Browns already had the deal on the table to make upwards of $40 million per year. We found that out at the combine. So it's not like the money part of this, in the end, it looks like that's what it was. But based on the word from his agent through I know Mary Kay reported this, it sounds like he just changed his mind. Like he had a change of heart. He decided he was willing to stay, maybe realizing he didn't have as much leverage as he wanted. And, just deciding okay, I can deal with this if they're going to make me the highest paid defensive player, non-quarterback in football. That's a deal I guess I'll have to accept, because who would say no to that? So yeah, maybe the money does kind of become the thing that tips the scales, but he already had this deal basically on the table as recently as last week, and his camp was still saying, we don't want to negotiate with you. So I still don't think when this all started, it was about the money for Myles. It certainly comes to that now. But that's a hard deal to turn down. And I wonder if something like the no trade clause got added in potentially. But again, I believe Myles when he said it wasn't about the money. I think when push came to shove, maybe he realized this wasn't going to turn out the way that he wanted, and he decided, okay, I'll stay in Cleveland.
Yeah, I think that there's two things in there that kind of stick out to me. The first is what you just said at the end there. Maybe he did get into it, maybe realized oh yeah, I really don't at this point, at this juncture, I don't have as much leverage as I thought I may have, and the way to gain it back is to go through this extension. Now, I think that you brought up a good point maybe before we were on air here about that no trade clause being very important, because that allows him to kind of control his destiny in the future. Because while this is good news, Spence, this is the start of what needs to be done. This regime has to now continue to build on this. And again, if they start losing again next year, they're going to get fired, and it's going to be a restart, and Myles is still going to have some control. So I know you kind of have a little bit more insight as to why that no trade clause is so important, but I think adding that in there and having it there for Myles gives him a little bit more stability in this.
Well, I want to be clear, because adding 4 years to your deal doesn't give you all the leverage really in the grand scheme of things, because that means the team controls you for 6 years plus 2 franchise tag years if they really wanted to. But the reason I think that the no trade clause is important is because, again, like you alluded to, if this team stinks next year and they only get you 5 wins, and Myles decides, I'm going to do this all over again and request a trade and all this different stuff, Well, now he has a little more leverage in deciding like where he's going to go. And so that means like if the Browns are going to execute a trade, they might not get as much as they want for Myles. They might not have the perfect package at their disposal. They can only send him to the teams that he says these are my teams that I would go to. And so it gives him a little bit more power over a future potential trade request or situation down the line. Again, the team obviously still sort of reigns supreme here when it comes to controlling his future because they now have 6 full years to do that plus. But again, it's at least it's sort of throwing him a bone, if you will, if this were to happen again, where he gets a little bit more say, and there's not even a discussion about like, well, hey, I would just send him to wherever and get whatever, get the best deal. Now he would be able to just kind of say, I want to go where and that's the other part of this is like, if a new regime were to come in, they might be less inclined to hold on to Myles as somebody else because the motivations are different. For Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski, they got to win now. They love Myles. They've worked with Myles the last, 5 years since they came here in 2020. So for them, it's like, we don't want to trade him. For a new regime, it might be, well, shoot, we can trade Myles and get at least a first-round pick, maybe 2 first-round picks out of it. And for an organization that's like sort of resetting here with new people, new faces at the front of it all, that sounds pretty enticing to us. Now the finances come into play too. That would make it difficult. But we see how much Andrew Berry manipulates the cap. Other teams can do that as well. And the money wouldn't ultimately become like a major issue for any team, I think, trying to trade for him because there always are ways to like move the money around, even though he's going to be 30, if he were to do this all again next offseason.
Well, and Spence too, where my mind kind of goes on this too is like, all right, something changed, and you commented on it, like, Mary Kay reported it that basically overnight he was like, all right, I want to stick around here, I want to stay. You guys have 24 hours to get this deal done, or whatever the exact quote was. But that also leads me to believe there's a real world where the Browns came to him with a more fleshed out plan. Maybe not so much a different plan, but maybe a plan that was more fleshed out than when Myles initially made the trade request, whatever it was, the day after the Pro Bowl. Because at that point, you didn't really know. Like, you kind of had an idea, but they've been able to do a little bit more research on the rookies and the free agents and kind of put maybe a better plan in place for Myles short and long term.
Yeah, and I was going to say the request went public the day after the Pro Bowl, but the team knew about it before that. So they already kind of knew it was there. And you bring up a great point because and I've talked about this a ton. When they sat down with Myles at the end of the season, there's no way they could have told him word for word, step by step, everything that they were going to do to fix the team this offseason. There's just no way. The season just ended. There were still playoff games to be played. Teams still going through their own decisions. Like, there was too much unknown at that time. So I'm sure they told him some version of like, hey, we're going to stay competitive, Myles. We're not going to throw in the towel and do a rebuild because we know that you wouldn't want that. We're going to go find a quarterback in free agency. We're going to consider drafting a quarterback, but we have to sort of vet these things before you get to a final solution. And now they've had time to get to that final solution of like what their plans are going to be 3 days out from the start of the new league year, a little over a month out from the draft, obviously, as well. And by the way, last week, they just had Shedeur Sanders, Cam Ward in that building to sort of host as part of their pre-draft visit. So they gave them a chance to sort of see what things could be like. And now maybe they have a better sense of like, we like Cam Ward, we like Shedeur Sanders. What do you think about these guys? And maybe Myles is like, you know what? I can get behind this. So yeah, there is a world where maybe they came with a different plan now and they've continued their conversations, but that would certainly explain why I've been perplexed for the last month or so as to how this organization just felt so supremely confident that this was going to end this way, because it seemed like Myles had drawn a line in the sand, and in the end they get proven right, and they were the ones in those rooms having those conversations, and so they knew, I guess, what could motivate Myles to stay, and they figured it out.
Well, and Spence too, like, it was started. I mean, it was already ugly to this point, but it was going to start to get nasty. I know that like you had just published a piece on our SI.com site about like this is going to get even worse than what it is. Yeah. Like there was a chance where Myles was going to start sitting out camp, sitting out games, whatever it was. But there was also an opportunity that like it's weird, like behind the scenes stuff was going to start coming to the surface. Because what was the report was last week that, Myles requested a meeting with Jimmy Haslam, and Jimmy put him say, go talk to Andrew Berry. And then like both sides started doing this like hearsay thing. And it was like, oh gosh, like this is going to get like a high school like lunch table kind of a feel to it. But you just did like, I didn't expect it to happen. Like I was like, the alert popped up on my phone. I'm like, oh my gosh, like this is a massive thing. And it seemed very matter of fact from what Mary Kay did report about, hey, Myles had a change of heart, whatever that change of heart was, it didn't matter. He told his agent, go get the deal done. You have 24 hours to do it. And here we are today with Myles Garrett kind of locked in and ready to, try to go back and win football games here in Cleveland.
Yeah, and I do think, listen, this is a good thing for the Browns. Nobody is going to ever convince me that this isn't a good thing for the Browns to keep I mean, I don't know. I always say the second best player in franchise history, just out of respect for Jim Brown. I don't really want to put him in front of him, but he could be arguably the best player in franchise history given how much of a freak he is. But regardless, to keep the second best player, one of the best players in franchise history on the roster is a good thing. It's a win. And Andrew Berry deserves credit for that. Listen, there's plenty of reasons to criticize Andrew Berry, his drafts. Do you trust him to draft this year and, build the right roster around Myles now to be competitive and actually stay competitive? Those are all things that can be debated and talked about and discussed, and you'd be warranted in doing so. But at the same time, it does not change the complete outlook of this franchise for this offseason. And that's you sort of alluded to this, like, yes, this is a small win on a Sunday here before free agency opens, but there's still a lot of things they got to solve. And that's all at Andrew Berry's feet. He has to prove a lot this offseason. So he gets the win from Myles Garrett and keeping him around and calling his bluff in some respects. But he also, has to, he now has to go prove himself. He now has to go prove that it's worth signing Myles Garrett to an extension and not embracing a rebuild, that he can keep this team competitive that way. And there's going to be a lot of places to do that, starting with free agency and then in the draft. But like now the pressure's on to still, like, it does not change where this Browns team is at. They have a lot of holes to fill, all those different things. And so those are the questions that still have to be answered. But this, at least, the Myles thing was always going to be the dictator of what direction this team was going to go. And I said at the time, this gives the Browns clarity. Like, if Myles wants out, you now know, like, okay, trade him and embrace rebuilding. But they dug in, they kept him around. So now your direction is stay competitive. Okay, how are you going to do that? Yeah. You got to prove it to me now in the next couple weeks.
No, it's now pressure's on. It's like, oof, Andrew Berry, you caught yourself or you bought yourself a day or two that you can take the pressure off. But now it's like, all right, full steam ahead on the draft. Whoever it is, that you're going to go try and get. Now you got to go get them, because Myles kind of throws you a little bit of a lifeline and said, hey, you don't have to blow it all up right now. And I think that ultimately Spence can change their approach to the draft. Now, I have some thoughts. I kind of want to get your thoughts on how you think this affects what the Browns are going to do, because if they are sold on a Cam or Shador, are they going to now go, hey, all the chips in the middle, we're trading up to one, we're going to get our guy, we're going to trade with Tennessee up a spot, leverage some either future picks or draft capital that they have in the draft, go get the number one pick, and then pick your quarterback? Or do you now trade back a step and to somebody who's going to go get Shador or Cam, and then you take Abdul Carter to pair him up with Myles? Like, there's a number of ways that this can go, but I do think this gives the Browns a little bit of a life raft of, you don't have to blow it all up right now, and you can afford to be really aggressive in this draft.
One, Myles is bought in for the foreseeable future, so I guess it buys you some leeway in terms of, like, okay, even if we don't get it figured out immediately, he's still here in 2026, right? You think. Now, maybe Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski aren't here in 2026, but that's a different conversation. So, yeah, listen, you bring up two scenarios there, and I actually think they're both very interesting, because, did they pitch Myles on, we're going to get our quarterback now and stay at 2 and draft him, trade up to get him, whatever, because we're sold on Cam Ward? Or did they sell Myles on, like you said, Abdul Carter, finally pairing him with like another elite pass rusher and getting this thing figured out? Like that way, and then sort of like figuring out the quarterback next year. Like, there are some different paths that they could take, knowing sort of where they're at in the draft. And that's what I do think is that's the next level to this conversation, right? Is like, what is the plan? And there are some different directions they could go there. So I think that's I'm glad you brought that up because it is the next part of the conversation in terms of like where things play out from here and what is the Browns' actual plan now that they have Myles back on board.
But as you say that, man, it's like this to me screams they're going to go all in on a quarterback, like in the draft. Because like if they're sitting there telling Myles, all right, we're going to pair you with Abdul Carter and we're going to get a quarterback later, he's looking at them saying, you're not going to be here. Like if we're at this point that at this time next year, if we're talking about the quarterbacks again, right, it's not going to be with Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry. Like they're going to be gone because that means you had another terrible season. And regardless if it's the plan on March 9th, like if it happens and we get into October and this team is 1-7, like they're gone. So it's like, to me, this screams go up, get whoever it is, and go pick them, and then bring in some kind of a veteran. A Kirk Cousins. I talked about this somewhere, I don't know where, but talked about how Kirk could be a really great leader in that room for a young player and at a cheap price tag. Or do you go get somebody? I don't know. I just feels to me this screams that they're going to go all in on getting a quarterback to try to win football games like next year and then be set up for long playoff runs in 26, 27, 28.
See, you say that though, and I kind of think the opposite too. Like, not to say that they're not going to take a quarterback, but I kind of look at it as like, well, now that they know they have more time with Myles, maybe that means they're going to just do the pass rusher, figure out the quarterback position for a year and try to draft one next year. Now, maybe the pressures of this regime can't think that way because they might not be here after this year. Maybe that still pushes them towards a quarterback, but it's all very interesting. Those are things that we can obviously dissect.
Or they told him, "Hey, we're bringing Joe Flacco back, and we're running this thing back.
Oh,
we're going back to the playoffs next year."
I got a hot take about that, by the way. I might be the only person in Cleveland that doesn't want Joe Flacco back, and it's not because I don't think he can play in the system and all that. But man, like I kind of want to just remember Joe Flacco the way he was.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying? Like if he does suck, I don't want to be like, oh man. This really ruined that 2023 season. Yeah, that was.
Yeah, remember when he cost us Myles Garrett? Yeah,
but I can save that for another conversation. But you know what? Another funny thing about this that I just kind of hit me. Myles saying that he wants to recruit people for free agency.
Yes.
Can we laugh at this for a second? Because the guy that's been requesting a trade for over a month now signs a new extension one day before legal tampering. And now he's going to go pitch people on why they should come to Cleveland. That doesn't really add up for me. That feels like who's going to be like, hey, Myles, you're staying in Cleveland. Yeah, I'm going to come play with you. Yeah. The first question they're going to ask is like, what made you change your mind from, feeling like Cleveland's a good place to play to them being like, yeah, no, never mind. I saw that player's report card that came out too. Like Cleveland doesn't really seem like it's a great place to play. So how are you going to pitch me on coming to Cleveland? That doesn't make any sense.
And guess what? Insert whoever, Joey Bosa or whomever you want. They're not getting $40 million. So give me another reason why Cleveland is a good place to be right now, because it's an uphill climb, man. They have a lot of holes to fill. But I do appreciate that part of it where, he knows that. And maybe some of it's just, saying what Cleveland wants to hear, but maybe there is something to the fact that, hey, he's going to go out and try to recruit guys to get here, try to get some people here. But to your point, I think it is pretty funny.
It's sort of like if you leave a job and then somebody asks you, like somebody reaches out to you and they're like, hey, what can you tell me about? I saw your job opened up. Like, what can you tell me about the position? And then you give you try to be nice about it. And you're like, oh, well, it's a lot of fun. You give this good review and then they're just sort of left but why did you leave?
Why aren't you there?
You didn't answer. Yeah. What happened that made you? So that, I don't know. It's kind of funny that now that I think about that. But I think the last part of this I want to get into, at least for today, just kind of revolves around the what, because listen, I mean, Myles made this a big dog and pony show. He went on Radio Row and bashed the Browns. And, I've talked a ton about how the day the trade request came out, it felt like fans at least understood Myles. They were like, okay, I get where you're coming from. And then 2 days later, he goes on Radio Row. He brings up LeBron James' name. And it started to turn where it was like, why are you talking to LeBron? Like, why are you consulting LeBron about this? And why are you going on Radio Row and just bashing the team? And this is just how sports works. Like, fans are going to gravitate towards the team because the team is the thing that their fandom is wrapped up in. Mm-hmm. It's a representation of the city that they live in, and especially a place like Cleveland where fans are super passionate. And frankly, players ultimately are just cogs in this machine, man. Like, they come, they go, and the team stays and you keep cheering for the team and the player is just one part of the story, right?
Yeah.
So I get where this all comes from, but I was kind of surprised at how over the month, like, people turned on Myles more and more, to the point where Friday, when you get the report about him being willing to sit out games, it felt like most of the fan base was officially like, we're against Myles now, like, boo this guy. And so I think what's interesting about this now is, like, some people are throwing out all this stuff about, well, hey, how do fans support this guy that basically, like, tried to force his way out and was talking bad about the team? I just don't think it's gonna, like, dude. Hold on, let me pull up the calendar real quick because I want to make sure I did this earlier and I forgot to pull up the calendar. The first week of the season is probably going to be like September 7th, right? If September 7th, September 14th, whatever it is the first Browns home game of the season,
guess who's coming out?
Those fans are going to be cheering for Myles Garrett. And it's we all accept, as fans of sports and as fans of sports, certain sports teams, that this is a transactional relationship. Like, our loyalty to the player is what the player's loyalty is to what is our loyalty to the players based off of what the team's paying the player. Like, it's all wrapped up in that. Like, we all have to accept that these are all hired guns. We'll cheer for them if they're wearing the colors of the team that we support. And, like, there's no hard feelings when the business side sort of comes out, and then it ends cordially with everybody staying together. And so anybody who thinks like this says he's burnt so many bridges that now he can't go back, it's like, no, like, this will all be water under the bridge. I don't see Ravens fans booing Lamar Jackson because he requested a trade 2 years ago.
No, you're dead on. Like, he is going to be the last guy announced out of the tunnel, and that First Energy Field or Huntington Bank Field, I guess, is going to explode, and it's going to be awesome. Like, I already forgot about him saying he wants to play with Jaden Daniels, and I already forgot about him saying he'd look good in a Lions uniform or a Vikings uniform, right? Like, it's part of it's all part of the gig, right? And I agree with you that, people are going to say some stuff. I'm sure you're going to get a lot of interesting stuff when you're back on the radio here this week in Cleveland, because, like you said, these Cleveland fans are passionate, but come draft time, come the start of fall camp, come the start of the season, like, this is all going to be gone, and everyone's going to be rowing in the same direction to try to win football game.
Well, and the flip side of that is, okay, but how do we know Myles is going to really want to play hard? Like, he wanted out, he doesn't care. Like, how does he get back on board? And my response to that is similar, because I think, once you sign the dotted line, like, you're committing to the idea that, like, you're bought in, right? Like, he changed his mind, he's bought in now. But also, on top of that, Myles is somebody who cares too much about legacy. Like, this guy, he was after the games this year, the 3-14 season, he was the one who he get asked every week, how do you guys stay positive? How do you do this? How do you do that? Like, how do you get guys to still stay bought in and give effort? And he was the guy saying, like, your tape is gospel. Like, what you put on tape is what people are going to use to judge you. And you have to care about your legacy. You have to care about yourself as a player. You have to care about this team and your teammates, and you have to keep playing hard for them. Like, he was the one talking all that up. So you're never going to convince me that, like, the guy who was saying those things after games, who does care and he cares about what his legacy looks like, is just going to show up day one and just, like, not try hard because he's pouting and he's mad that he didn't get his way in a trade request. When if he really wanted to, he could have just stayed dug in and skipped games and then maybe gotten his way, but he didn't. So yeah, like, I think it goes both ways. Like, the fans won't be mad at Myles anymore, and Myles isn't going to be some, like, lazy bum now that he didn't get the trade request. Like, I think it's all water under the bridge, and it's all just how the business of the NFL unfolds sometimes.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it, and I think that ultimately could be good, right? And I think for this Cleveland core, like, let's rewind a couple weeks ago when this all came to be, and Njoku, like, David Njoku was, like, in the jet trail of Myles Garrett on Radio Row, where Myles Garrett was like, Cleveland's horrible, I hate it there, I want to go play for Washington, and then right behind him was David Njoku saying, like, stay here. We got unfinished business. And, like, credit goes to some of those guys as well for kind of sticking things together. Like Joel Bitonio, obviously, commits to coming back next year. These are some core guys that Cleveland has, kind of built their team on the last couple of years. Nick Chubb, obviously, still kind of floating around out there. So you don't know how it's going to all impact that as well. And I think it'll be really cool to have Myles in there. And then, you never know too, Spence. This kind of came to me as you were talking just a second ago. Like, I don't know. There's also a world where they're like, hey, let's get you into an awesome deal, a deal that resets the market. And, if we're irrelevant at this, before the trade deadline next year, like, let's go get you to a winner, and no one can complain about your big contract because they're going to want to add you to a potential Super Bowl roster. I don't know. There's a lot of different ways to kind of look at this, but as we sit today, for at least the short term and the time being, it's a really great thing that Myles is back in Cleveland.
Yeah, still a lot to unfold, obviously, starting with free agency this week, which I'm sure Anthony and I have tons to discuss in terms of some of the moves that they make. I will say, just as a primer for free agency, I'm not expecting the Browns to make a ton of moves. I'm not expecting them to make any major splash moves. So anybody who's out here like, oh, Joey Bosa, I know you brought Joey Bosa. I'm not trying to throw you under the bus here. That was just the first thing that popped in my mind. But anyone who's like, oh, they're going to sign
your own people,
they're going to trade for DK Metcalf, and I don't think that's happening. But there are some ancillary moves they can make, and certainly some needs that they're going to have to address through free agency because they can't address everything in the draft. And we'll sort of see how that all unfolds. And getting Myles back on board with obviously a big part of that, even though I have my doubts about him being able to convince people to come to Cleveland after basically dragging him for a month.
It's a good point you make. I think free agency is going to be really, it's going to be a different one, I think, for Cleveland, where they're going to address, you're going to lose some guys. There's some guys that are going to be on the team, some names that you see that we're used to seeing in Cleveland Browns uniforms, hitting the road. But also, I think that Cleveland's not going to make those big splash moves, but I think they're going to try to address some depth holes in this free agency period. I'm excited to see. It's going to be a different type of free agency, in my opinion, but a fun one nonetheless, and a really important one because they can't spend at the top of the market like some of these other teams, but it's going to be really critical that everybody they bring in at a discounted rate, I say discounted, but like a lighter rate, is a good player and still has really good football left in them, because they're going to need everybody next season.
Well, and frankly, this isn't a great free agent class anyway. Yeah. So it is going to kind of be about like finding players that you can get on decent deals that aren't going to cost you a ton of money and sort of filling in some gaps that way. People might have questions about what the Myles extension means for the salary cap, by the way. We don't even really have those answers because we need to see like the breakdown of it all. I'm sure it's going to include void years, or it is going to be at some point including void years. I'm sure it's going to be backloaded. Andrew Berry loves to push money down to the future years, but we'll see what all that looks like as the days unfold here and we find out more information. But in the meantime, go ahead. What were you going to say?
I was going to say, what I text you, I think the salary cap's made up. I think I texted you something like that.
Yeah, I mean, I was arguing with a buddy of mine earlier on Twitter about that because he was like, how can you make this investment like with where the state of the team is? Like, it's not smart spending, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, yeah, but listen, the Eagles have a bunch of void years too. The difference is like they just have a good team. So these like nowadays GMs just don't care about that stuff. And I don't really care about the money. Like, pay what you want to pay and figure out how to make it work. But if you can't build a roster, then you're screwed anyway. So that's what Andrew Berry's trying to do is pair the very expensive team that he's built with a better roster. And we'll see if he can get it done. It's a very important offseason for him. And it all starts this week with free agency. So be sure to head on over to si.com/NFL/Browns. Because there's going to be a ton of stuff coming down the pike here in the coming days. It's legal tampering that starts tomorrow, but we know what that really means. It's where all these teams come to agreements on deals that were already consummated beforehand, and it's why legal tampering makes no sense because you're supposed to wait to sign deals until Wednesday, but they're already sort of figured out.
It's my favorite thing in sports, dude. It's my favorite thing in sports.
It's the wildest thing, and we'll certainly have you covered with all the breaking news and deals that come down over, again, at si.com/NFL/Browns, but also right here at the Cleveland Browns on SI YouTube channel, where you can follow along with all the important news surrounding the team, including this video, but all other videos. Megs and I usually do at least one sort of podcast breakdown a week. We'll probably have a couple for you this week because there's just going to be so much going on. But certainly follow along with all the content there because we try to keep you in the loop and discuss everything on this platform and on this forum. So thanks as always for stopping on by. For Anthony Moeglin, I'm Spencer German. Keep on following along with your favorite football team with the Cleveland Browns on SI.